Okay, there we go. All right, gone. Sorry, I just had to deal with the record. So, Shawn, I'd like to ask you some legal questions from the law. You don't have to answer. Great to get some clarification. So the CDC, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my act together. Okay, so from a historical and constitutional perspective, public health is largely a local and state function. That's from Washington, D.C., National Academies Press, Future Public Health. We also have something from the Journal of Medical Assistance. The U.S. Constitution grants primary health powers to the states. A lot of Duke Law Journal, 2006, State Executive Lawmaking in Crisis. Courts and scholars have largely overlooked the constitutional source and scope of the state's executive powers to avert and respond to emergencies. So from what I'm seeing, it seems that the CDC, the federal government itself, and legal scholars are saying public health and safety is largely by law the realm of the state and not the federal government. Is that?
Yeah, right? You're even seeing that with Donald Trump. Like I say, that's why, as much as people have been talking about federal shutdown, I think that's why he hasn't acted, because I think he knows he would be really pushing the limits of the Constitution. It would be hard for the federal government to completely shut down commerce, potentially with an act of Congress that could happen. But I think it would be very, very difficult from an executive action. That's absolutely right. Safety is generally viewed to be a state thing. State police department, state agriculture, like we've talked about, state health departments. A lot of the actual activity of health and safety of the individuals is happening with the state government.
Okay. I'd like to read from the California Disaster and Civil Defense Master Mutual Aid Agreement by Governor Brown, 2015 edition.
Okay.
I think I'm understanding what he's saying, but I just wanted to run it by you.
Sure.
So, quote, the governor may make, amend, or rescind orders and regulations necessary to carry out the provisions of this chapter. Orders and regulations shall have the force and effect of law. Due consideration shall be given to the plans for the federal government in preparing the orders and regulations. That sounds like it's up to the governor how much he wants to listen to the federal government. And as long as he or she says, I really considered it, I thought intensely about it, and then I made a decision, that's all they really have to do. I'm not seeing them saying, you will automatically do whatever the federal government says in an emergency, no matter what. This doesn't seem like it's.
I don't think that's consistent with how the constitutional system works. That's absolutely right. The states. The federal government and the states, they inform each other. There's usually two-way communication between them, but there's very few areas where one can force the other. Interstate commerce being one that we talked about, right? There's the Commerce Clause, which forces the states to do what the federal government says for interstate commerce. But for the most part, the states and the states have their own powers. They don't have to do what the federal government says.
8571, where the governor.
Well, let me bring up like a tangential point here that maybe drives it home. So like the legal drinking age, right? Louisiana didn't want to go to 21. So the federal government just said, hey, we're not giving you any highway money unless your legal drinking age is 21. Because the federal government couldn't say the legal drinking age is 21. So they used money to force the issue, right? Because they didn't have the power to say, we want the legal drinking age to be 21. They said, hey, we're just not giving you any highway money unless you make the legal drinking age 21. And then Louisiana finally knuckled under after they suffered long enough. So that's why you see some of these things done the convoluted way they're done, because the federal government doesn't have that full power to instruct the states on everything.
You already answered the question, but just for me to get all the points out.
Sure.
Last sentence, I'll ask you about the California Disaster and Civil Defense Master Mutual Aid Agreement by Edmund Brown on 2015 edition. Cooperation with federal officials and agencies. The governor may cooperate with the president and heads of the armed forces and other agencies of the United States and with officers and agencies of other states on matters pertaining to emergencies. And he may take any steps he deems necessary to put into effect any rules, regulations, or suggestions made by such persons or agencies.
Yeah.
Again, it sounds like the governor should listen to the federal government, but doesn't have to do what they say at all. Am I interpreting
right.
that specific
that's
language?
Right. Yeah, and part of it's going to depend on the nature of the emergency, right? This is obviously COVID-19 is a public health emergency, different emergency than if if a bunch of soldiers from some foreign country showed up on California shores. I don't think there would be much constitutional argument that federal troops couldn't go into California and repel the foreign invaders, right? So it's a different type of emergency. But for an emergency of this scope, where there's not the same type of it's not clearly within the federal government, right? The federal government clearly has national defense, right? So if the federal government had to come in and respond to a national defense emergency, I think the federal government could just come over and take and do what they want to do, right? So if foreign troops showed up in California, the federal government could come in there and push them out without talking to the state of California. But for things that aren't enumerated in the Constitution as being federal powers, it falls to the state. 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
The CDC, Centers for Disease Control, communication during an outbreak or public health investigation by Abigail J. Tumpy, David Daigle, and Glenn Novak, December 13th, 2018. They say, trust and credibility can greatly influence your ability to persuade affected persons to follow public health authorities' recommendations during an outbreak or public health response. I'd also like to read you a section from the Failure of Initiative Final Report of the Select Bipartisan Committee to Investigate the Preparation for and Response to the Hurricane Katrina Report by the Select Bipartisan Committee to Investigate United States Congress 2006. Page 163. Where communications were operable or soon were restored, long debated and unresolved issues with interoperability among federal, state, and local communication systems complicated the effort of first responders and government officials to work together in managing the response to Katrina. So what we have is the CDC and the federal government saying themselves that in an emergency, miscommunication and bad information gets people killed.
Yeah.
So, since Californians have almost no faith in the federal response or Trump, would it add extra weight for Governor Newsom to make it very clear that California can do anything necessary and proper to protect its people if Trump reopens the economy so that we don't have miscommunication and then mass deaths, as the CDC and Congress have said results in an epidemic with bad communication?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for people understanding their legal rights, and I think that's been one of the issues that's come out here within this thing is I think people should understand what the limits of the power are, right? And I think there's a lot of fear out there because people don't understand the limits and boundaries of that. So the hardest part is bandwidth and getting the message across. But I think it's a great idea to maybe get the California Attorney General or Governor Newsom's legal counsel to publish a memorandum about what the rights are so that people can understand it, and then people that have the interest or the media people that have the time to invest in it can actually read through and understand the boundaries of the law. I mean, I think it's a good exercise for everybody to do that analysis anyway, but I think it would be great information for the citizens to know, hey, this is the end of the federal power, this is the beginning of the state power, and this is what we're going to do, right? So I think you're in a tricky spot because you don't want to commit too early to certain actions. You don't know what's going to develop. All this is very fluid.